Look, it's time to take sides. The election is over. You're either with us or against us. That is, with the United States or against the United States. We have a new president-elect. His name is Donald J. Trump. So, move over Barack, move over Hillary, Harry, Jill, and all you namby-pamby, pathetic losers still crying in your grande double-shot skinny lattes. You know, there was a time in this country when we united behind the flag in celebration of America's new president, our new leader. We all did so in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected. We had high hopes for a united country, irrespective of our politics. And it's time for the left, assuming they're capable, to show the same dignity and class to the 45th president-elect. But no. This week, the president himself, Barack Obama, announces his intention to investigate whether Russia interfered with the presidential election, assigning our intelligence agencies to conclude the task before he leaves office. Seriously? Why now, Mr. President? You've been watching the release of information from WikiLeaks for months. You have watched the release of Hillary Clinton's emails. In fact, some even were sent to you. You've watched the release of John Podesta's emails and the disturbing information contained therein. You've watched the double-talking mainstream media outed for providing questions to your hand-picked successor, Hillary Clinton, for months. And you never say a word. But now it finally hits you that your successor of choice has not been elected, which you yourself said would be a personal insult. So you now decide it's time to investigate. And the suspect, Russia. Why are you talking about this now? You had a chance to put an end to the hacking, the breaching, and the interference, assuming that it might impact the election before the election. We have the best metrics operations in the world. And if all the warning signs were there long before the election, and now a month later you wake up and you decide not only are you going to investigate, but you're going to investigate Russia, using the same bozos, the ones who said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, the same bozos who said that we're defeating ISIS, the same intelligence geniuses who gave us the Benghazi BS, a politicized intelligence group. This isn't about the election, is it, Mr. President? This is about domestic politics. It's not about November 2016. It's about January 2017. And your attempt to prevent Donald Trump from the smooth transition of power and your inability to face the overwhelming Electoral College win that the American people gave him. Ironic, since you and your wannabe successor were so fired up that he might not quietly accept Hillary's ascension to power. So it fits that you say nothing about Jill Stein's phony recount nonsense, also backed by Ms. Hillary, and our wasted taxpayer dollars that will pay for it, and the division that it's creating. And query, why are you so obsessed with Russia? You who cut a deal and were made a fool of by the world's largest sponsor of terrorism, Iran. You know the one that funds Hezbollah and Hamas, whose people yell death to America. You know the ones you gave $150 billion to and secretly sent them another $400 million on pallets in an unmarked plane, and who knows how much more. But you're obsessed with the Russian, who at least is a Christian, who himself is obsessed with killing ISIS. A Russian who's had his own problems with Muslim terrorists, who told us twice about the Tsarnaev brother, the Boston bomber, that your administration was too dumb to follow through on, with deadly consequences to Americans. And even Hillary hates the Russians and now wants to blame Russia for her loss because she can't believe that Americans can see through her lying, untrustworthy, money-grubbing, non-charitable character. Good old Harry Reid, another Democrat truth-teller. You remember him, the one who was all into those desert tortoises, or at least, so he said, having nothing to do, of course, with money and solar power and his son-in-law and the Chinese. He's calling for Jim Comey to step down because he says that Comey and the FBI knew the Russians were hacking into the election. Obviously, Mr. One Eye knows more than the FBI themselves. Now I got a news flash. Everybody's been spying on everybody else for years. Even Obama knows Angela Merkel's hair appointments. Remember how angry she was when she found out that he had her emails? The difference is now they do it by cyber attacks. Don't be fooled by these narratives. It's all part of an orchestrated effort to build a wall to prevent Donald Trump from making America great again and building a relationship with a country that is fighting ISIS. And don't get me wrong, I despise all dictators. But between the dictator that thinks I'm an infidel, and therefore you and I and our families should have our heads cut off, and the dictator from whom I simply want to keep my distance, who now and then might warn me of our common enemy, the choice is a no-brainer. And that's my open. Tell me what you think on my Facebook page or Twitter. Hashtag Judge Jeanine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to thank Chairman Goodlatte for his leadership on this bill and a host of others on the Judiciary Committee. Mr. Speaker, I want to have a pop quiz. That may seem unfair to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, but I'm going to give them a hint. The answer to every one of the questions is the same. I'm going to read a quote, and then you tell me who said it. These last few years, we've seen an unacceptable abuse of power, having a president whose priority is expanding his own power. Any guess on who said that? Mr. Speaker, it was Senator Barack Obama. Here's another one. No law can give Congress a backbone if it refuses to stand up as a co-equal branch. The Constitution made it. Senator Barack Obama. What do we do with a president who can basically change what Congress passed by attaching a letter saying, I don't agree with this part or that part? Senator Barack Obama. I taught the Constitution for 10 years. I believe in the Constitution. Senator Barack Obama. And my favorite, Mr. Speaker, one of the most important jobs of the Supreme Court is to guard against the encroachment of the executive branch on the power of the other branches. And I think the Chief Justice has been a little too willing and eager to give the President more power than I think the Congress or the Constitution originally intended. So my question, Mr. Speaker, is how in the world can you get before the Supreme Court if you don't have standing? What did the President mean by that when he looked to the Supreme Court to rein in executive overreach? If you don't have standing, how can you possibly get before the Supreme Court? So my question, Mr. Speaker, is what's changed? How does going from being a senator to a president rewrite the Constitution? What's different from when he was a senator? Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's an amendment to the Constitution that I missed. I try to keep up with those with regularity. But what I do know is this: process matters. And if you doubt it, Mr. Speaker, ask a prosecutor or a police officer, both of whom, as my friends on the other side of the aisle know, both of them are members of the executive branch. What happens when a police officer fails to check the right box on a search warrant application? The evidence is thrown out, Mr. Speaker, even though he was well-intended, even though he had good motivations, even though he got the evidence, because process matters. What happens, Mr. Speaker, when the police go and get a confession from a defendant? He did it. This is not a whodunit. He admitted he did it. You got the right person for the right crime. But what happens if he doesn't follow the process? The defendant walks free. And the criminal defense attorneys who are now congressmen on the other side of the aisle know that that's exactly what they argued when they were before the judge. Not that the end justifies the means. Don't look at the motivations. Look at the process. Mr. Speaker, we are not a country where the end justifies the means, no matter how good your motivations may be. We all swore an allegiance to the same document that the President swears allegiance to faithfully execute the law. So I will be listening intently during this debate for one of my colleagues to explain to me what that phrase means. What does it mean? Not to execute the law, but when the framers thought enough of that phrase to add the modifier faithfully. What does that mean? And if a president does not faithfully execute the law, Mr. Speaker, what are our remedies? Do we just sit and wait on another election? Do we use the power of the purse, the power of impeachment? Those are punishments. Those are not remedies. The remedy is to do exactly what Barack Obama said to do, to go to court, to go to the Supreme Court, and have the Supreme Court say once and for all, we don't pass suggestions in this body, Mr. Speaker. We don't pass ideas. We pass laws, and we expect them to be faithfully executed. And with that, I would yield back to the gentleman from Virginia.
His sarcasm is dripping. His disdain of our concerns for the safety of our families is palpable. At a time when the American people are scared, when we need reassurance, he mocks us. He talks down to us. He divides us. His ability to incite division, unparalleled in our history.
Apparently they're scared of widows and orphans coming into the United States of America as part of our tradition of compassion. Now, first they were worried about the press being too tough on them during debates. Now they're worried about 3-year-old orphans. That doesn't sound very tough to me.
Congressman Trey Gowdy had the best response.
The President says we're scared of widows and orphans. With all due respect to him, what I'm really afraid of is a foreign policy that creates more widows and orphans.
But we've seen this kind of division before, haven't we? In Ferguson, stoking the flames of racial hatred, chaos, and unrest. And when the ball is in his court, he can't even bring a civil violation. ISIS is spreading death and destruction in Paris. Al-Qaeda doing the same in Mali. On the heels of the downing of a civilian Russian airliner, the killing of innocents in Lebanon. Mr. President, can you not understand? We're scared. All we want is the truth. No unsubstantiated narratives. Al-Qaeda's on the run. ISIS is a JV team. The day before the Paris attack, you're crowing, ISIS is contained. And that genius sidekick Kerry of yours says, we're winning and ISIS is losing. We're not afraid of the truth. We're not afraid of Syrian refugees, most of whom are fleeing ISIS. What we are afraid of are radical Islamists, Muslim terrorists who seek to hide among Syrians to enter our homeland. And instead of reassuring us, you say we're popping off? You're more angry with reporters who are asking questions on our behalf than you are the ISIS barbarians. And you preach what our values should be, that we can't slam the door on refugees as if we're cold-hearted creatures. You yourself said we spend more than any other country on humanitarian aid. And don't play the religion card that we're not Christian if we don't do what you want. It's the individual who turns the other cheek, not the government. It's the individual who's supposed to be charitable, not the government. And you say we don't discriminate against people because of their faith. So tell me why there is a disproportionate number of Muslims admitted here compared to Christians. More than 95% of the Syrian refugees admitted are Muslims, and only 2.3% of Syrians you've admitted are Christian. The truth is, Christians represent 10%. So why only admit 2.3%? Even the preamble to our Constitution reads in part, "We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and provide for the common defense, establish this Constitution for the United States." The first obligation of government is the protection of its citizens. That's why you're the commander-in-chief. Yet this is what you say.
But what I'm not interested in doing is posing or pursuing some notion of American leadership or America winning or whatever other slogans they come up with that has no relationship to what is actually going to work to protect the American people.
You're not interested in pursuing some notion of American leadership or America winning? Don't you want us to win? Are you ashamed of us? Instead, you go on and on about how ISIS doesn't represent Islam. Stop. Stop telling us what Islam is not, and start telling us how you're going to protect us. This nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Let the Muslims tell us who they are and who they are not. And by the way, we're not slamming the door on anyone. Not that they have a right to be here in the first place. And why aren't the Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, taking them? And you tell us that these refugees are subjected to rigorous screening and security background checks? That's baloney, and you know it. And the head of the FBI knows it, the head of Homeland Security knows it, the director of National Intelligence knows it. How the hell do you vet someone who has no papers or possibly a fake passport that you can buy for 750 euros like one of the Paris attackers did? How do we even know the name they give us is true? What are you going to do? Call 1-800-ASSAD and say, look, I know we're trying to kill you, and I know you're not scared of me and you're busy with a civil war, but can you have your clerk check her records to see if Mohammed is a terrorist? And even if you got that call through, I wouldn't believe you because you've already proven you're not capable of protecting us. Russia told you twice the Tsarnaev brothers, the Boston bombers, were terrorists. The FBI interviewed them twice and said, nothing to see here, folks. They were on a terrorist watch list and still went in and out of our country. You never stopped them. Be honest for once. This is no different than what you did at the southern border for Central Americans fleeing poverty. There are no controls. You take their fingerprints, and if you do, they're just on their way. God help us.
Violence directed towards the United States and other Western targets in Libya. Attacks on the consulate in Benghazi, attacks and assassination attempts on the British ambassador, attacks on the International Red Cross, attacks on courthouses, judges assassinated, culminating on September the 11th, and the murder of 4 Americans, including our ambassador to Libya. Before those 4 murders, Mr. Chairman, just a few weeks before that, our embassy in Libya said this to the Department of State: the security condition in Libya remains unpredictable, volatile, and violent. So, Mr. Chairman, despite what would appear to any reasonably objective observer as an escalating pattern of violence, including sophistication, coordination, and management, this administration blamed the murder of our ambassador and 3 others on a video. Don't take my word for it, Mr. Chairman. Let's look at what Ambassador Rice herself said. Our current assessment is that what happened in Benghazi was, quote, in fact, initially a spontaneous reaction. I don't know what the phrase in fact means in diplomatic legalese. I can tell you what it means in a courtroom, Mr. Chairman. It means it's a fact. And she went on national television and she said, not as this ambassador has said, that I'm not going to speculate, that I've got to get all the information. She said, in fact, this was a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired hours before in Cairo, almost a copycat of the demonstrations against our facility in Cairo, which were prompted, of course, Mr. Chairman, by a video, is what she said. And then she proceeds to say the attack was spontaneous. I can think of few things, Mr. Chairman, more antithetical to spontaneity than a 12-month-long prologue of violence in Libya. And then she said she relied solely and squarely on the information the intelligence community provided. Mr. Chairman, I would like to have another hearing where we can ask Ambassador Rice under oath, who told you what when? You're going to blame the intelligence committee? You come before this committee and you tell us who told you it was a video. Who in the intelligence community said it? Who in the diplomatic community blamed this on a video? And then we move to Jay Carney, who's the spokesperson for the leader of the free world. And this is what he said, Mr. Chairman. I'm saying based on information that our initial information that includes all information, we saw no evidence to back up claims by others that this was a pre-planned or premeditated attack. What we saw was evidence that it was sparked by the reaction to this video. And that is what we know thus far based on evidence, concrete evidence, close quote. Mr. Chairman, you know that in former life, I spent a little time in the courtroom. So when I hear the phrase concrete evidence, it means something to me. That's even stronger language than simply saying something is in fact. So 2 representatives of this administration gave demonstrably false statements, not just to us, but to our fellow citizens on national television. Now, is the explanation for those demonstrably false statements, as my colleague from Florida just asked, was it negligence? Was it just a reckless disregard for the truth? Or was it more nefarious than that? Mr. Chairman, the American people are reasonable. People understand investigations take time. People don't expect you to speculate until you have all the facts. What they will not forgive, Mr. Chairman, is being misled. We want our questions answered, and I want them answered by the people that went out before the American people and sought to mislead them by blaming this on a video when there is no evidence, concrete or otherwise, to support the assertions made by this administration. Mr. Chairman, I just had a conversation with Jason Chaffetz out back, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. He still gets emotional talking about what he saw in Libya. There were 4 brave Americans who died under circumstances that we can scarcely fathom. The terror, the fear, the anarchy of being killed in that fashion. They did what their country asked them to do. They stood post under dangerous circumstances even after requests for security were denied. They stood their post. The least we can do is stand this meager post that we've been assigned and demand that this administration speak the truth to the people it's supposed to serve.
We will make America great again.